Hey guys! In this video, I'm going to fill you in on different types of graphite drawing materials and tips for beginners that can save you some money with useful replacement tips. Also, watch out for an important announcement at the end of the video. Enjoy!
Okay, break a piece off. Number one thing that you need to look for is things like that don't really apply to you. You don't really need to worry about it. Be a little bit controversial, especially. I would like to start by talking about the pencils. And the difference between these pencils is that they have different markings. So you can see letter H's, which stands for hard, and letter B, which stands for black. Also, you would notice that there are different numbers standing next to those letters, and that number indicates how many times hard it is. So if this is 4H, it means it's 4 times as hard as, for example, an H. And same goes for the soft pencils, where you've got 2B, so it's twice soft than, say, would be a B pencil. And you can get all the way to this is probably the softest that I have, is the 9B pencil, but maybe you can get even softer. And so let's test them out and let's see the difference. So for example, when you've got something like 4H, which is quite a hard pencil, they usually last a really long time as well, and when you try and shade with them, you get really good line. It's quite hard to blend them, but they keep their form for a long time. That's why it's good to use them for, like say, engineers and architects like to use them when they're working on their drawings, just because they're so, they keep their shape and they're very nice and hard, and they also do quite a good indentation in the paper as well, so it can be quite hard to erase them. Now let's go with a 2B pencil next, and you can see just how softer and how much darker it is, and that's just 2B. Now if we go for something like 9B, then it's a completely different story. We get even a darker shading and softer blending, and we'll talk about blending a little bit later. So when you are choosing pencils for your drawings, I would strongly suggest that you choose a big range of things. So go from some harder ones to softer ones. You will probably find that you're using softer ones more if you like to blend things, and you will probably find that you would be grabbing the harder ones if you like to keep a lot of lines and a lot of sharpness in your drawings. But again, you really need to try it out for yourself, because everyone has their own specific likes and dislikes. I do prefer to use softer pencils. Probably my hardest ones would be maybe HB that I would be using, and even then I use them very rarely. So these pencils would be the 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B, 9B would be the ones that I use the most. Now I'd like to talk to you about other kind of pencil, and that's just a graphite pencil, so plain graphite. So the difference between this pencil and this pencil is that this one doesn't have that wooden bit going around like your usual pencils would, and there are pluses to this and minuses. Now the plus is that you can use it for shading really easily. It covers a really large area and you still got control over it. Now because it does have a thin layer of plastic, keeps your hands nice and clean, and you can sharpen it with a knife, or I guess a sharpener, pencil sharpener, if that's what you like to use, like a usual pencil. But the downside is that it's much harder to get the really fine point, like you would, for example, on wooden, your regular wooden pencils, just because it's so much easier to sharpen these than these graphite pencils. You also get them in the range of softness as well. So this one is 9B, and you can also get them in 2B and 6B and so on. So again, depending on what your style of drawing, you'd prefer to use a harder one or a softer one. Next on the list is this kind of graphite, very similar to this, and you probably have all seen it in the art shops. And it's also graphite, it's not charcoal, don't get those two confused. But the cool thing about this is that you can use it not only like this, as you would the other pencil, but you can also use it like that and shade large areas quite quickly. It's especially useful if you're doing live drawing, you know, some quick sketches and things like that. If you don't want to buy this, say you're a student or you're just trying things out, you don't want to spend too much money just trying out lots of different things that you might not even like, you can always grab one of these pencils, okay, break a piece off. I'm not going to do it right now, but it's quite easy to do that, and remove that outer layer, and you pretty much get the same thing. So I'll just show you here. So that way you can kind of double up by buying one tool, one type of material, with creating this little graphite thing as well. So just a little tip there. Now I would like to talk to you about these pencils, these mechanical pencils. It can sometimes be a little bit controversial, especially for realistic drawings and things like that. Like, for example, I was schooled in Russia in a very traditional way, and we were not allowed to use these pencils. Like, if our teacher would see us using that, you were out of the class, pretty much. The cool thing about using these guys is that you don't really need to sharpen them, just because they are so sharp, and you can get into very little details without any problems, without having to stop to sharpen things like eyelashes and little details, you know, just little tiny little bits that you need to really darken, or they're just perfect for that. Now they also come in different sizes, so you get them in 0.7 mils, at least these are the ones I have, and 0.5 mils, which means you would need to get different graphite sizes refills for them. The cool thing about this now is that as the time goes on, I noticed that you can get them in a variety of softness. I remember when I was starting up, you could only get them in HB. Nowadays you can get them, see, I've got this one's 2B, and then this one's a B, so look out for them. I think you're more likely to find them in an art shop than you are in a stationery shop. In the stationery, you're more likely to get just the plain HB graphite refills for them. Can't suggest any particular company. I've used different ones, and they all seem to, you know, do their job. And it's, yeah, they're just so cool to use. I don't think I'd be drawing without them, but that's just me. And now I would like to talk about something else, and something that you might like to use if you are desiring a softer look to your drawings, to your pencil drawings, and that's smudge sticks. That's a number one thing. So they also come in different sizes, right? So you can get them really large or even really small, and there are so many different sizes in between. You can probably see me using them in the other process drawing videos, so you can have a look at that. I'll link a couple down below for you to watch. And if you want to get into a tiny little detail, like maybe you're working on a pupil or something like that, then these tiny little guys are just perfect. Now, what is this? It's pretty much a rolled up paper. See, I've got one that's unrolling here. It's a really fine, soft, sort of a like newsprint type of paper that's been rolled up, and it's perfect because you don't need to use your fingers. Well, some people do use their fingers. You don't want to do this because there's sweat and there's oil and, you know, things that you don't want to be transferring from your fingers onto the paper. So I would suggest you use other things. Over time, your smudge sticks do become quite dark, to the point where they can actually deposit graphite onto clean paper. Sometimes I find it very useful, and I actually keep a couple that are quite dark like this for when I need to smudge the really dark things. But you might also want to smudge something very light, and then you don't want for this stuff to be coming off and sort of smudging everything on your work. So you can clean them. You can buy special cleaning blocks in the art shop, but again, you can just you know, you can just get out of spending more money for things that you might not actually need at the end, and just use a little bit of sandpaper, and you can see how all this stuff is coming off, and it's sort of a cleaning it more and more, and you can just keep doing it until the whole thing is nice and white. So there's another tip there, just to save you time and money from going and buying more smudge sticks and things like that. Now, if you're saying, well, I'm just a beginner, I don't want to run into the art store and start splashing out money and right, left, and center, there are some things you can find around your home that you can use. Things like cotton buds. They would do a good job as well. They're a little bit softer, so it might take a little bit longer to get there, but you still can. And they are small enough for you to still get into little bits and pieces. If you would like to just softly blend things afterwards, like for example, if you created a, I don't know, some kind of a drawing, right? And then you want to just soften it up a little bit. It won't blend it completely, but just to soften it up, you can use a brush. And you see how it's just softening it up just a little bit without smudging it completely. Okay, of course, if you want a really good smudge, you would need to go back to this and just give it a good smudge. You see the difference there. Now, another thing as well, and that's if you say, for example, you're working on something really misty and really soft, and you want to bring in a bit more softness all over without smudginess, then what you can do is you can just take a bit of cotton wool like that and just go over it, and that would create a really soft look as well, if that's what you're after. See, you can see it happening already. You see, the more it will pick up, the more of the smudging effect you will get as well. So there's another little material you can use. Really, you can pretty much use anything around the house. You can use paper towels, you can use different types of paper, you can even try and make your own homemade little smudge sticks, like this one here that I have is just rolled up paper. So, you know, just use your imagination, and you can really get a lot out of it. That's, of course, if this is the effect you're going for, if you want the smudgy, sort of a soft look to your drawings. If you don't, stay away from all of these things. Okay, now let's talk about something else that you can be making marks with, and that's erasers, rubbers, or whatever you like to call them. And you can get different ones. Like, for example, you can get the standard, something that you probably see the most around in stationery shops and school shops and things like that, and that would be the vinyl rubber. So what it does is that it erases quite clean, all right, but it does not differentiate. It erases a large chunk, okay, and you get these bits and pieces around, and it can also smudge things. So for example, if there's something that's quite strong and dark like that bit there, and you start to smudge, you know, it can leave these dark marks that later you can't get rid of at all. So the plus is that these are everywhere, and you can get them quite cheap. The minus is that you can erase a larger area, and it can leave these smudged dark marks that you can't get rid of when you are later wanting to get that area quite light. And then let's go on to the next rubber, and this is a kneaded eraser, or putty rubber. You know, some people say it's like a blue tack rubber, but this is not actually blue tack. You can use blue tack, but you won't get near as good of an effect as you would with a proper kneaded eraser. So for example, you can see this here, and this is what it looks like when it's new, and then as you keep using it, it becomes darker because it just collects all the graphite. If you use things like charcoals as well, I do suggest to keep two separate rubbers, one for graphite, one for charcoal, just because you don't want to be transferring that stuff all over your graphite drawings. Cool thing about this rubber is that, just like the title suggests, you can shape it. You can shape it, and you can get into lots of little details if you need to. You know, when you're working on the texture for the hairs, for example, You know, it's just perfect to get back in and just create that sort of a look. That's number one. Number two is that it is very soft in picking up the graphite. So, you know, as with this rubber, it completely removes everything, like we did that little test there. All right, so with this one, you can lift some up without completely erasing it. So for example, you've done something and you think, oh, that's too dark, but you don't want to completely erase it. So what you can do is just tap on the area until it becomes as light as you want this. So that's why this is, I think it's a good spend, because you would really find it a lot of fun to use. And in between, while you're not drawing, you can always sculpt and make lots of little funny things, and just play with it. So it's a great little tool to have. Another type of rubbers that sometimes I use is gum rubber. Now, gum rubber is the kind of a rubber that will run out quite quickly. So say, for example, comparing to this one, gum rubber is probably not going to last you anywhere as long as the other one. But the cool thing about it is that it does pick up graphite reasonably well, quite soft. But what it wouldn't do is it wouldn't leave those dark lines on your paper, dark markings on your paper that you can't get rid of. That's the good thing. It also doesn't pick up that sort of that dark stuff that these kind of rubbers would. It pretty much just crumbles. So as soon as it touches paper, it just crumbles away, and it stays mainly clean. But again, that's the reason why it just finishes so quickly. It sort of has a different feel to it as well. Gum rubbers don't feel as rubbery and as hard as vinyl rubbers. So just another thing for you to maybe try or consider. And another little tip that I can give you is, when you've got a lot of these little eraser bits, you can actually you can do this, but if you've got a whole lot of drawing, what you're going to get is that graphite on your hands and smudge everything. You can blow on it, just make sure you don't spit on it. But there's another tip, and you can grab a feather, and feather just seems to have an amazing texture for getting rid of the little eraser bits without actually smudging this too much. I mean, if you go too hard, you will smudge it. It just, I don't know, it's just almost magical. I actually learned this tip from one of my students. So it's pretty cool. So find yourself a nice big feather and go for it. We were talking about mechanical pencils before, and this is like a mechanical eraser. Again, pluses and minuses. Now the pluses, at least particularly this one, is it actually erases really well, and you can get really small details out with it, and you can see how it gets it to just a white paper. It's also quite small, so you can get into lots of little details and things like that. It does pick up some graphite, but you can always clean it if you want to. That it's not that much of a problem, but you always need to get refills for them, and they're not very cheap to buy. In the first place, I can't remember, I think I spent about 10 or 11 bucks on the pencil alone, and then you need to get the refills for this. So if you are on the budget, or if you're just starting up and sometimes you just don't feel like going and splashing out, there is another tip that I can give you, and that is that you can get one of these vinyl rubbers, and you can actually just take a little slice of it. Now, with this technique, your rubber is not going to last long, but it's still cheaper than going and buying something like that mechanical rubber. And for a little bit, this can go really well. Sometimes I do this when I forget my mechanical rubber, or it's somewhere within, not within the reach. So I just go for this, and this would work just as well, because you get a nice, clean, sharp edge on this. You can just go back and do the same thing. And it can give you a really nice effect. Now, at last, but not least, let's talk about the paper. Paper is probably one of the most important aspects that a lot of people don't even think about when they're starting to draw, because you usually just draw, you know, just doodle on whatever you've got on hand. And it'll be mainly like, you know, say your workbook or textbook, or, you know, back of a maths book or something like that. So if you would like to really get into this, and especially if you want to create something that is not just a little doodle you don't really care about, it's something that you might want to gift to someone or frame it, or, you know, do something special with it afterwards, you really need to think about that kind of paper that you're using. Now, when you go into the art shop, for example, you will be just flooded with all the different types of paper that's there. And you just, if you're a beginner, you just don't know which way to look, what's right for me. Is it this, is it that, or whatever. Number one thing that you need to look for is the heaviness of the paper. And that's usually marked with grams. So, for example, you would see something like this kind of paper, and it would have 300 grams on it, written on it. So it means it's a particular thickness. Right, it's quite thick and it's quite heavy. Now, if you find something that's, say, like 110 grams, it will be much lighter, much softer, sort of a floppier, you know, maybe even partially transparent. So what you want to do is you want to choose the right paper for your project. So I can't tell you what's the right paper for you to use, but you want to choose the right one for what you are working on. That's number one. So heaviness is a number one thing. You also need to look for texture. Now, you can get really rough paper, especially if it's watercolor paper. You can get some really, really rough stuff. If it's, for example, sometimes you can get paper that's made for printmaking. Again, it will have specific properties. It might have like a frayed edge kind of a thing, or you know, it will be really good in handling water, for example, because sometimes for printmaking you have to soak the paper in before you do anything with it. So again, it would depend on the kind of quality that you want in your paper. Now, if you are just drawing with pencil, all of these water soaking qualities and things like that don't really apply to you. You don't really need to worry about that much. But what you do need to worry about is texture, because if you've got something with quite a bit of texture, like this paper here, for example, when you're drawing, the texture will show through. So it will be very hard to get really, really fine details, even with this kind of pencil, because the line, rather than going smooth on a smooth paper, it will kind of go bumpy like that, because it's going along a bumpy texture. Also, it will change the way your pencil will be smudging on the paper, because when you'll be smudging, you will be picking up that texture there, compared to, say, smudging it on something really, really smooth. Another thing you need to think about is how well would your graphite lift off it. So, for example, something like this, you can get a really sharp definition there with the eraser, compared to, for example, something like this there, where I don't know if you can pick it up on camera or not, but the line itself is a little bit sort of is a little bit softer, again, because you get that bumpiness going along. Yeah, so these are the things to keep in mind. Now, you can get different types of paper. You can get very textured paper. Now, this is something in the middle. It is watercolor paper, this particular one, but it's not very textured. It's quite smooth for watercolor. You can get really, really textured paper. I don't have any examples at the moment, but they're so rough that it's literally like you get a lot of shadows on there. And you can, of course, get something much softer, like something like this card here. And you can just compare, for example, going on this and then going on this. So if you are after details, definitely, definitely, definitely go for smoother paper. If you want a little bit of texture, if you want a little bit of, just that feel that you can get from rougher paper, then go for this. You can also find papers that are quite smooth, and that usually means that they were hot rolled, or you can get them when they're not hot rolled, haven't gone through a hot press, and they would be a bit more matte.
I hope you've enjoyed this drawing tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe and press the notification bell. And now, the important announcement. Do you guys love watching raw footage of real-time drawing and painting videos, like what you are seeing on the screen right now? Or perhaps you would like to see more art tips and tutorials, like part 2 of this video? Then check out my Patreon account. You can find the link in the description down below. Thanks for watching.